welcome to our deep dive
Oh, this is exciting.
into Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations.
Yeah?
It's going to be fascinating to unpack some of the most influential ideas in economics
Absolutely.
and to kind of see how they hold up in our world today.
I think a book written in the 18th century
Yeah.
and how it still resonates today
I know, it's crazy.
in the 21st.
We have excerpts that cover a lot of ground, from the origins of money
Right.
to the dynamics of wages and profits, the role of government and global trade.
All very relevant.
But I think the best place to start is with something Adam Smith was really captivated by.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued.
That pin factory example.
Yeah, the pin factory was Smith's way of illustrating the power of the division of labor. He was blown away by how much more productive workers became when they specialized in specific tasks.
Oh,
Like, imagine trying to make an entire pin yourself
right.
versus focusing on just one step in the process. You would be much faster and more skilled if you were just shaping the metal or attaching the head.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
It's like a basketball team where everyone focuses on their strengths.
Sure.
The point guard handles the ball, the center grabs the rebounds.
Yeah.
Everyone benefits.
Exactly.
But how does this idea of specialization play out in today's economy?
It's everywhere.
Really?
Think about your smartphone.
Okay.
No single person could make one from scratch.
Yeah, that's true.
It takes a global network of specialized companies and workers, each contributing their expertise to create this device.
So that's the division of labor
That's the division of labor in action.
on a massive scale.
Massive scale.
So Smith saw this hyper-specialization
Yes.
as a key driver of productivity
Uh-huh.
and ultimately wealth.
Precisely.
Okay.
And it ties into his broader idea of the invisible hand.
Okay.
This concept that individuals pursuing their self-interest can actually lead to benefits for society as a whole.
Okay, now that's a little harder to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
Isn't self-interest usually seen as, well, kind of selfish?
Right.
How can that be a good thing for everyone?
That's a question that economists and philosophers have been grappling with ever since Smith.
Yeah.
What he was getting at is that when individuals are free to pursue their own economic interests,
Okay.
they're incentivized to produce goods and services that others want. This creates competition,
Right.
innovation,
Yeah.
and ultimately a more prosperous society.
So it's not about everyone being altruistic.
Right.
It's about the system channeling self-interested actions
Yeah.
towards a common good.
Exactly.
Got it.
It's like a market where bakers are trying to make the best bread.
Okay.
Not necessarily out of the goodness of their hearts, but because they know that will attract more customers and lead to more profit for
Right.
them.
But wouldn't that also lead to some cutthroat competition?
Oh, for sure.
What about those who maybe get left behind in this system?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Smith acknowledged that there were potential downsides to unfettered self-interest.
Okay.
Monopolies could emerge,
Right.
crushing competition. Some individuals might be exploited.
Yeah.
That's where the role of government comes in,
All right.
to establish rules and guardrails to ensure that the market benefits everyone, not just a select few.
So it's like finding that balance between individual freedom
Yes.
and collective well-being.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's something we're still figuring out today.
Totally.
Do we prioritize low taxes and minimal regulation,
Right.
letting the invisible hand do its thing?
Yeah.
Or do we enact more social safety nets and government programs to protect those who might struggle
Right.
in a free market? There's no easy answer.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on those economic debates we see in the news all the time.
It's fascinating to see how these ideas, first articulated by Smith over 200 years ago, are still shaping our discussions today.
Crazy.
It really speaks to the enduring power of his work.
Okay, so we've got specialization and the invisible hand.
Yes.
Now, I'm curious about how Smith viewed the actual mechanics of the economy.
Okay.
What about things like wages, profits, and rent, that whole money side of things?
Smith dives deep into that.
Does he really?
He breaks down those three primary sources of income: wages for labor, profits for capital, and rent for land.
Okay.
He observes how they're all interconnected and influenced by factors like supply and demand.
So it's not just about how much money you make.
Right.
It's about where that money is coming from
Yeah.
and what forces are at play in determining those incomes.
Exactly. For example, Smith noticed that wages in England and Scotland were different, despite the two regions being part of the same country.
Wow.
This was due to restrictions on worker mobility,
Interesting.
highlighting how labor markets and regulations can have a huge impact on people's livelihoods.
It's making me think about things like minimum wage laws
Uh-huh.
and the debates we have today about the gig economy
Yeah.
and worker rights.
Those are absolutely relevant connections.
I know.
And speaking of connecting things,
Okay.
Smith was also fascinated by how money itself evolved.
Okay.
He traced its development from bartering systems,
Uh-huh.
where people would trade goods directly,
Okay.
to the use of precious metals as a more efficient medium of exchange.
Okay, so bartering is like, I'll trade you this cow for that pile of wheat.
Exactly.
But at some point, carrying around cows and wheat gets pretty cumbersome, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where precious metals like gold and silver came in.
Mhm.
They were portable, durable,
Uh-huh.
and had a relatively stable value,
Yeah.
making them ideal for facilitating trade.
Makes sense.
Smith even talked about how the discovery of American silver mines had a huge impact
Oh, wow.
on European economies.
It's like discovering a new energy source or something.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this influx of silver had a ripple effect,
Okay.
leading to increased trade, economic growth, and even some inflation.
Wow, and this is all before globalization,
Exactly.
as we know it. Now, Smith wasn't just describing how money worked.
Okay.
He had some strong opinions about how it should be used.
Oh, really?
He was a big advocate for free trade, believing that nations should specialize in what they do best
Okay.
and exchange goods and services openly.
Uh,
He even called out the East India Company, which had a monopoly on trade with certain regions,
right.
for stifling competition and ultimately hurting the British economy.
That sounds like a very early version of the arguments we hear today about protectionism versus free trade agreements.
Exactly.
Interesting how those debates keep coming back around.
They do.
Yeah.
And it shows that many of the economic challenges we face today have roots in these fundamental principles that Smith was grappling with centuries ago.
So we've got this picture of individual self-interest driving economic activity.
But also the need for some level of government oversight
Yes.
to ensure fairness and stability.
Uh-huh.
Where does Smith land on the whole role of government debate?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something we'll explore more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Smith was definitely wary of excessive government intervention in the economy.
Great.
He believes that in many cases, the invisible hand of the market was more efficient at allocating resources than any government policy.
So he wasn't exactly a fan of big government.
Not exactly,
No.
but he did see a role for government in providing certain public goods, like infrastructure and defense,
Okay.
enforcing contracts, and preventing monopolies from stifling competition.
Right.
He even laid out principles for taxation, how it should be fair, efficient,
Okay.
and not overly burdensome for businesses and citizens.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where government sets the stage for a healthy economy
Yes.
without overstepping its bounds and actually hindering progress.
You got it. And that's a tightrope walk that governments are still trying to master today.
This is all so incredibly relevant. I'm kind of blown away.
I know, it's fascinating.
I feel like I'm starting to see those economic headlines in a whole new light.
That's what's so amazing about diving into classic works like The Wealth of Nations.
Yeah.
They give us this historical lens to view our present-day challenges.
Uh-huh.
And often we find that the questions we're wrestling with today have echoes in these conversations that have been going on for centuries.
I can't wait to dig deeper into the rest of the excerpt
Oh, me too.
and see what other gems of wisdom Adam Smith has in store for us.
Should be good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Wealth of Nations.
It's amazing how relevant these ideas still are, even when Smith is talking about joint stock companies, which were a relatively new thing in his time.
Right.
It's like he's describing the giant corporations we see today.
Okay, let's rewind a bit.
All right.
What exactly were joint stock companies?
Uh-huh.
And why was Smith so skeptical of them?
Imagine a company that's owned by a bunch of people who each contribute some money,
Uh-huh.
buying shares or stock in the company.
Right.
That's the joint stock model.
Got it.
Smith saw how these companies could be really powerful, especially when they were granted monopolies over certain trade routes, like the East India Company had.
So it's kind of like crowdfunding,
Yeah,
but on a much larger scale
exactly.
and with much higher stakes.
And Smith worried that the people running these companies, the managers, essentially might not always act in the best interest of all the shareholders.
So even back then, they were worried about the whole too big to fail problem.
It's a theme that definitely echoes through history.
Yeah.
Smith argued that these large companies could become complacent and less innovative if they weren't facing real competition.
Makes sense.
He saw it happening with the East India Company, which he believed was hurting British trade with its monopolistic practices.
Kind of ironic he was all for individual self-interest driving progress.
Right.
But when it came to these megacorporations, he saw how that self-interest could actually stifle innovation.
Yeah.
And harm the overall economy.
It's a nuance that's often missed in simplistic readings of Smith's work.
Okay.
It's not that self-interest is inherently bad.
Right.
It's about the context and the structures that channel that self-interest.
So it's like you need the right rules of the game to make sure everyone is playing fair.
Yeah.
And the system actually benefits the majority, not just a select few.
Precisely, and Smith saw a crucial role for government in setting those rules and providing certain essential services that the market alone might not provide effectively.
Okay.
He was a big proponent of investing in public works like transportation infrastructure, roads, bridges, canals, things that would facilitate commerce and help the economy grow.
Makes sense. It's hard to have a thriving economy if goods and people can't move around easily.
And he also saw education as a vital public good, something that would create a more skilled workforce and ultimately a more prosperous nation. But he wasn't a fan of how universities were operating back then.
Really?
Overly focused on abstract philosophy, he thought they should be teaching more practical skills.
Preparing students for real-world careers.
So he was kind of an early advocate for STEM education. Interesting how some of those debates about what we should be teaching in schools are still going strong today.
They are. And it highlights how Smith was thinking about economics, not just in terms of abstract theories, but in relation to real people and their lives. He saw the economy as intertwined with social structures and the well-being of citizens. He believed that economic progress should lead to social progress, a more just and equitable society.
That's a really powerful idea. It's not just about growing the pie, it's about how that pie is divided and who benefits from that growth.
Exactly. And Smith argued that as economies develop, there's a natural shift from systems like feudalism,
Right.
where power is concentrated in the hands of a few landowners, towards more commercially driven societies where wealth and power are more dispersed. He saw the rise of a merchant class, challenging the old hierarchies.
So economic development could be a force for positive social change. That's a pretty optimistic view, especially considering the times he was living in. It is, but he was also realistic about the challenges. He knew that government had a vital role in maintaining social order and protecting citizens from violence and injustice. He saw defense and law enforcement as essential functions, creating the stability necessary for economic and social flourishing.
So it's not just about letting the invisible hand do its thing. There's a need for a visible hand of government to ensure a safe and just society.
Exactly. And Smith believed that government should be funded through a fair and equitable system of taxation. He wasn't a fan of taxes that were overly complicated or burdensome for people to pay.
Right.
He also cautioned against excessive public debt, arguing that it could stifle economic growth and burden future generations.
He sounds like he'd be right at home in today's debates about tax reform and government spending.
It's amazing how much of what he wrote still resonates today.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Specialization, the invisible hand, wages, profits, rent money, trade the role of government, even education and social structures. It's like we're building a whole economic framework brick by brick.
And that's what's so brilliant about The Wealth of Nations. It's not just a collection of random economic ideas. It's a comprehensive and interconnected system of thought.
And even though it was written centuries ago, it still has so much to teach us about our own economic reality.
Absolutely. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll take a step back and consider the lasting legacy of Smith's work. What are the key takeaways, and how can we apply his insights to navigate the complexities of the 21st century economy?
I'm ready to see where this all leads. This has been a mind-expanding journey so far. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Wealth of Nations.
It's amazing to think we've only just scratched the surface of this incredibly rich and complex work.
I know, right? It's like we've been on the whirlwind tour through the history of economic thought, and I feel like I've learned more in the past hour than I did in my entire Econ 101 class.
There's a reason why The Wealth of Nations is still considered a foundational text. It lays out these core principles that continue to shape our understanding of how economies work, even in a world that's vastly different from Smith's time.
So let's zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture.
Okay.
What's the lasting legacy of Smith's work? What are the key takeaways that we can apply to our own lives and our understanding of the world today?
For me, one of the most powerful insights is that idea of the invisible hand.
Right.
How individual actions driven by self-interest can create a system that ultimately benefits society as a whole.
Yeah.
It's a concept that can be both inspiring and a bit unsettling, right?
It is. On the one hand, it's amazing to think that all these complex economic interactions are happening organically without some central planner dictating every move.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it can feel a bit chaotic and unpredictable. Like, are we really just relying on everyone acting in their own self-interest to create a just and prosperous society?
That's where Smith's emphasis on the role of government comes in.
Okay.
He recognized that the invisible hand needs a visible hand to guide it, to set those ground rules, provide those essential services,
Right.
and ensure that everyone has a fair shot at participating in the economy.
So it's not about choosing between free markets and government intervention. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where both forces can work together to create a thriving and equitable society.
Exactly. And that's a debate that continues to rage on today as we grapple with issues like income inequality,
Right.
globalization, and the role of technology in shaping the future of work.
Yeah.
Smith's insights provide a framework for thinking about these challenges, but they don't offer easy answers.
It's like he gave us this toolkit, these fundamental principles that we can apply to analyze and understand the economic forces at play in our world, but it's up to us to figure out how to use those tools effectively in our own time.
Precisely, we have to consider the unique circumstances of our own era, the challenges that Smith couldn't have foreseen, and use his work as a starting point for our own explorations and solutions.
So it's not about blindly following Smith's prescriptions. It's about engaging with his ideas, questioning them, adapting them, and ultimately using them to shape a better future.
Exactly, and I think that's a powerful lesson we can take away from this deep dive.
Yeah.
The Wealth of Nations isn't just a historical artifact. It's a living, breathing conversation that continues to this day.
And it's a conversation that we all have a stake in, whether we're policymakers, business leaders, or just everyday citizens trying to make sense of the world around us.
Absolutely.
Understanding the forces that drive economic activity is crucial for creating a more just and prosperous society.
Absolutely. Smith's work reminds us that economics isn't just about numbers and graphs.
Right.
It's about people. It's about understanding human behavior, the incentives that drive us, and the systems we create to organize our economic lives.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's this intersection of history, philosophy, psychology, and politics. It's about understanding the world we live in and shaping the world we want to create.
Well said, and I hope this deep dive has sparked a curiosity in you to explore the Wealth of Nations further, to grapple with its insights, and to apply its wisdom to your own understanding of the world.
Because, as Adam Smith himself might say, the pursuit of knowledge, like the pursuit of wealth, is a journey best undertaken with an open mind, a critical eye, and a spirit of endless inquiry.
That's a great way to put it.
So until our next deep dive, keep those minds engaged, those questions flowing, those explorations going. Happy learning.